Welcome to a deep dive. Today, we're looking at a pile of sources, articles, some research notes you've shared, all focused on one really eye-catching moment.
That's right. We're talking about Elon Musk publicly criticizing the Trump administration's one big beautiful bill.
And then his departure from his advisory role right after.
Exactly. Now, it might seem like just, political fireworks.
Yep.
But when you dig in, it's really rooted in some major policy decisions and some hard economic numbers, too.
So our mission here is to unpack that, pull out the key insights from these sources, maybe find some surprising facts, and really look at the wider implications.
Yeah, what does this clash between a huge tech figure and the administration actually mean? For fiscal policy, for how government functions, even for America's place in the world, we want to cut through the noise.
Okay, let's get into it. The flashpoint, the main event. Elon Musk slams this one big, beautiful bill. He had some choice words, didn't he?
He really did. I mean, that quote saying it was big or beautiful, but not both, that's pretty direct.
And his main beef was?
The spending. He called it massive spending. That would, and this is his quote, increase the budget deficit, not just decrease it. Coming from him, that's, well, significant.
Especially because, as you mentioned, he wasn't just some outsider commenting. He actually had a role, right, inside the administration.
Oh, absolutely. At that time, Musk was basically Trump's cost-cutting point person in D.C. He chaired this group called the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE for short.
DOGE, okay.
And its stated goal was huge, help the administration cut $1 trillion in spending. They even claimed they'd already found, $175 billion in savings?
Right, so he's literally the guy brought in to cut spending?
Yeah.
And then this bill lands on his desk, figuratively speaking.
Precisely. And you can see why he'd be upset. From his point of view, this bill just completely undercut everything DOGE was trying to do.
Adding trillions to the deficit.
Exactly. It directly contradicted the whole mission he signed up for. He actually said in a CBS interview something like, "I was disappointed. The bill increases the budget deficit and undermines the work that the DOGE team is doing." He felt it was actively working against them.
Wow. Okay, so if that's his big criticism, what's actually in this one big, beautiful bill act? Why did it supposedly add trillions to the debt?
Well, it's a really sweeping piece of legislation. First off, it barely passed the House, 215 to 214. Super narrow.
That close, yeah.
And Musk's core complaint about the deficit, it seems backed up. The Congressional Budget Office, the CBO, estimated it would add about $3.8 trillion to the national debt over the next decade, mostly by making deficits bigger.
$3.8 trillion. That is just a massive number. How does a bill even get there?
A big chunk comes from extending those 2017 Trump tax cuts, making many of them permanent for corporations and individuals.
Okay, tax cuts.
Plus some new tax breaks, too, like exempting tips and maybe overtime pay from federal taxes.
All right, so lots on the tax cut side. What else is driving that $3.8 trillion figure?
Significant spending increases in areas that are, let's say, popular with the Republican base. Military spending gets a boost. Border security funding goes up. More guards, more deportation efforts.
Yeah.
It even apparently loosens rules on things like gun silencers.
And then on the other side of the ledger, to offset some of this, or maybe just different priorities, are there cuts?
Oh, yes. It rolls back a lot of policies from the Biden administration. Big cuts to green energy tax credits, clean power incentives. Those are drastically reduced.
Okay.
And it tightens eligibility for programs like Medicaid, things like stricter work requirements for people to qualify.
Right. So it's a real mix. Permanent tax cuts, more military and border spending, but cuts to safety nets and green initiatives. I can see how critics, like you see in the sources, called it a boondoggle for the wealthy.
That's definitely a major line of criticism we found. Some estimates suggested the poorest Americans might actually see their income go down under this bill, while the top 10% benefit the most. It was clearly contentious. Even Trump himself, while pushing for it, apparently admitted he wasn't happy about certain aspects.
That 215-214 vote really says it all, doesn't it? Even within the party. Now, you said Musk wasn't just an advisor. He was a huge financial backer for Trump. How did that relationship, seemingly so close, break down so publicly over this bill?
Yeah, they were very close for a while. The sources, like Reuters, mentioned Musk putting nearly $300 million into Trump's 2024 campaign and other Republican causes. He was apparently the party's top donor last year.
$300 million. Wow.
So he wasn't just advising, he was bankrolling a lot of it. He was chairing DOGE, appearing at signing ceremonies for spending cuts alongside Trump. I mean, having a private billionaire in that kind of quasi-official government role, it really was unprecedented.
Unprecedented is right. So this public split isn't just some advice advisor quitting. It's a massive donor, a former insider,
Yeah,
actively attacking the administration's signature piece of legislation.
absolutely. As one source put it, his comments implied a growing distance from Trump, who he'd helped elect. Reuters really emphasized him being the world's richest person and Trump's biggest funder. The optics of that guy turning on the bill are pretty stark.
And was it all smooth sailing before this blow-up? Or were there signs of tension earlier?
Sources do suggest Musk's style could be, well, abrasive. Reuters mentioned clashes with other top officials, even supposedly insulting Trump's trade advisor.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and some cabinet members reportedly got wary of his methods. So while the bill was the flashpoint, there might have been some underlying friction about how he operated within that government system.
So the break might have been brewing.
Possibly. His official role seems to have ended around late May. And apparently there were quiet talks in the White House then about how to manage his exit without upsetting more allies in Congress. Musk himself tweeted thanks to Trump as his role ended, said he'd do a lot less political spending, but still took shots at the fiscal plans.
Okay, let's dig a bit deeper into the policy side of the bill, beyond just the headline deficit number. Musk apparently used the phrase anti-Robin Hood.
Yeah.
What's that critique getting at, specifically with what's in the bill?
That phrase, which economists like Justin Wolfers also picked up on, really points to the idea that the bill shifts wealth upwards, away from lower-income folks towards wealthier individuals and corporations.
How so?
You see it in the contrast. On one hand, you have measures like tightening Medicaid eligibility, adding work requirements, things affecting lower-income people. On the other hand, you have massive extensions of the 2017 tax cuts, which disproportionately benefit higher earners and companies, plus those new breaks for tips and overtime. So it looks like taking from one group to give to another, essentially.
And how might that kind of domestic policy choice play out internationally? Does it clash with America's image abroad?
It definitely can create a contradiction. The U.S. often promotes things like inclusive growth and social equity in global forums like the G20 or the UN. So when domestic policy seems to move sharply in the other direction, cutting safety nets while the wealthy get tax breaks, it can look, well, hypocritical. That undermines U.S. credibility. And you can bet rivals like China will seize on that to question American leadership and consistency.
That's a really interesting point, how domestic policy echoes globally. Now, back to Musk's time inside. He blamed entrenched federal bureaucracy because his DOGE team didn't hit that $1 trillion savings target, even though they claimed those early cuts. Is his experience kind of a warning for other private sector leaders thinking of going into government?
Oh, absolutely. It's almost a textbook example of that culture clash. You have the Silicon Valley mindset, move fast and break things, running smack into the, let's say, methodical, often slower, legally bound processes of government.
Yeah.
His push to streamline things hit real roadblocks, like federal judges actually ordering the reinstatement of staff his initiative had terminated, even apparently in sensitive areas like nuclear oversight.
Wow, nuclear oversight. That really shows the difference in worlds.
It really does. And diplomatically, that kind of internal struggle sends a signal. Allies might watch that and wonder if U.S. reform efforts are really sustainable. If someone with Musk's profile and resources can't cut through the red tape, how effective can Washington really be at implementing big changes? It also points to a tricky recruitment problem. How do you attract that private sector talent if the system itself pushes back so hard?
And all this was happening around the same time Moody's downgraded the U.S. credit rating, stripping it of that last AAA. How do those two things connect?
Yeah, losing that final top-tier rating from Moody's was huge. A really seismic moment, financially speaking. First time since World War II, apparently, that no major agency saw U.S. debt as absolutely pristine.
What does that mean, practically? Higher borrowing costs.
It can mean slightly higher borrowing costs, yes, but the symbolic hit is maybe even bigger. The whole global financial system leans heavily on the idea that U.S. Treasury bonds are the ultimate safe asset. A downgrade chips away at that confidence.
And that affects others.
Big time. Allies like Japan and Germany hold trillions in U.S. debt. A downgrade introduces risk into their portfolios. Meanwhile, countries like Russia and China, who want to move away from the dollar anyway, see this as more justification, maybe accelerating their de-dollarization efforts.
So it's much more than just the interest rate the U.S. pays.
Much more. You combine that downgrade with a very public fight over this big, beautiful bill with a figure like Musk questioning its fiscal sanity. Well, the picture it paints internationally is one of a country potentially struggling with basic governance and fiscal control. And that perceived weakness is something autocratic rivals love to highlight.
Okay, so the bill squeaked through the House, but now it's got to get through the Senate. We heard Senator Rand Paul called the math wimpy and anemic. With Musk out of the picture as an internal advisor, can deficit hawks like Paul actually stop this thing in the Senate?
The Senate is definitely the key battleground now. And yeah, you see real splits within the Republican Party there. Figures like Paul, Ron Johnson, they represent that more traditional deficit hawk wing, clashing with those more loyal to Trump's agenda, whatever the cost.
But it's not a simple calculation for them, is it?
No, because the bill also has things their base really likes. Big boosts in border security funding, more money for the military. That makes it harder for some Republican senators to just vote no.
What other pressures might be playing on senators as they decide?
Well, diplomatic observers and everyone else really will be watching a few things. There's definitely heavy lobbying from business groups. The rate coalition was mentioned, pushing hard for those tax cuts.
Right.
But then there's the potential for public pushback, especially over things like the Medicaid cuts. If you start seeing significant protests, maybe like the kind targeting companies seem as politically aligned, the sources mention Tesla vandalism as an example of that kind of risk, that could make some senators nervous, maybe distance themselves.
That's an interesting link. Corporate protest, risk influencing legislative votes.
It shows how tangled it all gets. But look, despite the divisions and the potential backlash given Trump's ongoing influence in the party, some version of this bill seems likely to pass the Senate eventually, maybe with some tweaks to calm down the critics.
So the real question is,
The real question watching at the Senate is, does fiscal responsibility still mean anything for the GOP establishment? Or is this the moment it gets completely sidelined?
let's pivot now and focus more on the tech dimension. Elon Musk, obviously a tech titan, Tesla, SpaceX. What does this whole drama tell us about the power, maybe the influence of figures like him in politics today, both shaping it and maybe sometimes disrupting it?
It's undeniable proof of the huge influence these tech leaders can have. I mean, Musk's role wasn't just advising, it was quasi-official, running a government initiative, DOGE, reportedly introducing his AI chatbot, Grok, to government agencies. That's incredible access.
Way beyond typical lobbying.
Absolutely. And then his public break just underscores their power. One person, maybe with just a tweet, can potentially derail or significantly challenge a major political priority.
And did this political activity have blowback for his actual businesses?
It seems so. Sources like Reuters and CBS did connect his very visible political alignment, especially with Trump, to problems for his companies. Tesla, in particular, faced protests, boycott calls, dipping sales. Some reports explicitly linked that downturn to his political role.
So there's a business risk.
Definitely. When a CEO gets that deeply partisan, it can alienate customers, impact the brand, maybe even the stock price. Those Tesla vandalism incidents are a stark example of potential real-world consequences.
It really raises wider questions, doesn't it? When one very wealthy individual who's also pouring hundreds of millions into campaigns can potentially rewrite policy from the inside and sway public opinion from the outside.
It absolutely does. It touches on fundamental questions about democratic norms and corporate influence.
Now, are there arguments on the other side that maybe bringing tech leaders into government isn't always bad?
Sure, some analysts argue that people from the tech world can bring valuable perspectives. Data-driven thinking, maybe a focus on efficiency that government sometimes lacks. Musk's DOGE team did claim those $175 billion in savings, even if the overall goal wasn't met, and the number is disputed.
But the overall takeaway seems more negative.
The consensus among analysts cited in the sources leans towards this being a cautionary tale. Using that kind of corporate power so directly for political ends, it can really strain the system. You hear more talk now about needing clearer rules on conflicts of interest when CEOs take on these powerful government roles.
Okay, let's zoom out one last time. The global view. How does the rest of the world look at this whole saga unfolding in Washington?
Internationally, I think the reaction is probably mixed, but with a strong dose of wariness. Particularly in Europe, leaders were already a bit uncomfortable with Musk's political influence.
Right, he'd had run-ins before.
Yeah, endorsing far-right parties, sparring with the UK over content on X, getting pushback from leaders in France, Norway, the UK. So seeing him now publicly break with Trump over a major fiscal bill, allies might just see U.S. policy as even more unpredictable than they thought.
Stability is what they want from a partner.
Exactly. And beyond the politics, global markets and foreign governments are watching U.S. debt levels very carefully. The IMF keeps issuing warnings. Adding another $3.8 trillion via this bill, as Reuters highlighted, doesn't help.
So Musk's criticism might resonate internationally.
It might validate some existing concerns, yes, but it also just highlights the internal divisions and maybe policy disarray within the U.S.
What about purely from a diplomatic perspective?
Diplomats might quietly be a little relieved. Musk is stepping back from that direct government role, maybe less daily unpredictability from him specifically. But they'll definitely register the messy exit, the public fight.
Makes the U.S. look less stable.
It certainly makes claims of bipartisan support for stability ring a bit hollow when a key former insider and top donor is trashing a major bill. Countries critical of Trump might feel, vindicated. And in places like Asia, focused on tech competition, EV markets they're watching very closely. If it looks like ties between U.S. tech giants and the government are messy or frayed, others might feel emboldened to push their own agendas on subsidies or regulations.
So it reinforces an image of division and perhaps unpredictability.
Pretty much. Musk's break just adds to that picture of Washington factionalism. And this whole phenomenon, tech billionaires deeply involved in politics, it feels like a very American thing that doesn't always translate well overseas. Diplomats will likely tread carefully.
And there could be regulatory consequences, too.
Possibly. Politico noted his past actions already had EU regulators thinking about tighter controls on his platform. This kind of episode could fuel more calls for accountability, both for the U.S. government's fiscal path and for the role hugely influential private figures like Musk play.
But even stepping back from the formal role doesn't mean his influence disappears.
Right. Oh, definitely not. The sources suggest his retreat to SpaceX and Tesla is more of a recalibration. With those massive donations, he still holds significant sway within the GOP. That influence might just be exerted more quietly now, in the shadows, as one analyst put it, avoiding the kind of public drama we saw here.
So summing up this deep dive, it seems Elon Musk's complaints about the one big beautiful bill weren't just hot air. They were tied to real, very large numbers about the national debt. It marked a dramatic break in a powerful alliance. And it really throws a spotlight on the growing, complicated, sometimes messy influence of tech billionaires where business, government, and global politics intersect.
Absolutely. This whole fight has put U.S. fiscal policy under intense scrutiny, both at home and abroad. And you can be sure global eyes are watching very closely to see how Washington steers the ship after this kind of very public, very high-stakes clash.
It definitely leaves you with a lot to chew on. When you think about that tension, the private sector's drive for efficiency, bumping up against the complex, sometimes immovable machinery of government, and you consider how closely the world watches what the U.S. does domestically. What do you think this moment really tells us about how the relationship between powerful individuals, the way nations are governed, and overall global stability is changing?
It's a huge question. It certainly forces us to think about where power really lies today and how these collisions between different worlds can create both new possibilities and profound risks.
A powerful thought indeed. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into these sources.